Galnet News Digest, 24th of August 3309. We read the news so you don't have to. In this week's news, we look back at the history of federal presidential candidate Zachary Rackham. Criminals should not be allowed to run for federal office, according to Federal Times star reporter Bryanna Blanco. And she claims to have the receipts to prove that Zachary Rackham is unfit to become president.
Now that he's standing for president, Rackham's affairs are subject to even more scrutiny than normal, and it's Bryanna Blanco who has been leading the charge. In her article on Tuesday, she claims that Rackham has a criminal past, and that his election to be leader of the Free Galaxy could severely damage the Federation. Rackham's supporters have in turn accused Blanco of leading a witch hunt, and there's at least some justification for this. Everything Rackham has done for the last 5 years has been accompanied by critical commentaries from the financial pages of the Federal Times.
Rackham first came to attention 5 years ago in June 3304 as an accomplice of the infamous Don Antonacci. Colonia had been constructed around the misjumped Zack's station, and the Colonia expansion initiative had led to numerous factions establishing a presence. However, none of them had a shipyard. And this was before fleet carriers, so none of the Colonia bases could sensibly be used as an actual base. It was Zachary Rackham, at the time a billionaire, who stepped in to provide a free shipyard at each of the Colonia bases, and it was Bryanna Blanco who pointed out that this was almost certainly a dodge to hide the assets of Rackham Capital Investments from the auditors.
A couple of months later, Rackham mysteriously won $1 billion credits in the Federal Grand Lottery. Could this have been a ruse to launder the proceeds of crime, or had Rackham somehow fixed the outcome of the lottery to ensure he won? His company sponsored the creation of the Herculean Machines Duradrive, which can be bought at Cowper Dock in the Anima system. Rackham had become a big success in the Federation, but he repeatedly harked back to his humble origins as a trader in a second-hand sidewinder. The truth, according to journalist Bryanna Blanco, was rather different. Rackham was, she said, the self-same person as notorious pirate Calico Zack, the pirate lord from outside the Federation, who raided freighters and liners, and who was successful to the point that Pirate King Archon Delane began to see him as a rival. Rackham laundered the wealth he had pirated to set himself up as a businessman, and a very successful one at that. He established Rackham's Peak far above the galactic plane as a billionaire's paradise. Mixing with the cream of society, he gambled in exclusive clubs, and he may or may not have taken Onion Head recreationally. He owned Picasso's Guernica, having bought it from the infamous thief, the Winking Cat.
In 3305, Rackham managed to use Blanco and the Federal Times to his advantage. A series of assassinations of key personnel of Rackham Capital Investments had been staged by a rival ex-pirate who wanted to seize control of the corporation. Blanco had been investigating the goings-on at the corporation, and when what appeared to be federal agents came to the Federal Times asking for help in their investigation, Blanco shared with them all the information she had. But they were not government officials at all. They were imposters employed by Rackham to find out who was behind the takeover attempt. With the rebellion quashed, Rackham very kindly donated a large sum to the Federal Times in appreciation of their ethical journalism. In April 3308, Rackham, now promoted to trillionaire, began to strenuously deny that he was thinking of running to succeed Hudson as federal president. He moved to Beta Hydri, a solidly federal system, and began to claim that he'd been born there. Blanco pointed out that Rackham had failed to produce any citizenship documents. Rackham took over local industries and corporations, built a huge skyscraper, and took over Cavanagh Space Frames, the corporation behind the Orbis starport, renaming it as Rackham Space Frames.
In May 3308, a year before the presidential election was due, Rackham announced he would be a candidate, but it wasn't until February 3309 that he eventually launched his manifesto, a populist, low-tax, high-spending ticket encouraging the electorate to believe that they could all be as successful as Rackham. With the "Just Like Me" slogan, he achieved funding from his society contacts and secured an ex-Republican congressman, Harlan Turk, as his running mate. In the presidential debates, Rackham promised zero taxes for all except criminals, but he has entirely failed to explain where the funding for federal government will come from. His claim that he will make every single federal citizen rich and successful takes some beating as a campaign pledge.
All this time, Bryanna Blanco has been pursuing Rackham, trying to expose his non-federal pirate origins. Rackham, who makes donations to many worthy federal charities and who's a member of the Federal Intelligence Agency Oversight Board, has never had to worry about the authorities taking an interest in his affairs, and it seems unlikely that the Federal Times will be able to change this. Seoul Today has backed Rackham and has called for the Federal Times to be sued for libel.
With the federal election postponed until the end of the year, we'll need to wait a little longer to see whether the alleged Calico Zack Rackham will become the next federal president, in spite of Bryanna Blanco's 5 long years of work to discredit him.
And that's this week's Galnet News. Galnet News, we read the news so you don't have to.